One man's pride closed the door. But when the same door reopened, the cost had tripled, and so had the lesson. The early afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the bustling marketplace nestled in the heart of the town. Rays of light filtered through leafy branches, dappling the cracked pavement with shifting patterns of brightness and shade. The air was alive with the mingled scents of fresh produce, fragrant herbs, and exotic spices. Vendors called out softly, offering their wares with practiced smiles, while shoppers moved with leisurely purpose, weaving through the maze of colorful stalls. Among the patchwork of vendors, one modest stall drew a subtle but distinct attention. It was a simple wooden table, neatly arranged with small glass jars filled with vibrant powders and crushed herbs, fiery reds, deep browns, golden yellows. Above it hung a handmade sign, Deschamps' Fine Organic Spice Blends. The stall was unpretentious, but meticulously cared for, a reflection of the man standing behind it. Deshaun Miller was in his late 20s, his skin a rich shade of mahogany that seemed to absorb and reflect the sunlight. His eyes held a steady warmth and quiet pride as he moved gracefully behind the stall, offering samples and small wooden spoons to passers-by. His voice was calm, each word carefully chosen to share the stories behind his spices, their origins, the farmers who harvested them, the traditions behind each blend. He was passionate, knowledgeable, and genuinely eager to connect. Deshaun loved this market, the pulse of the community, the lively chatter, the way the sunlight made his spices glow like little treasures. But beneath his patient demeanor, there was a quiet resolve. This stall was more than a business to him. It was his dream, a testament to hard work, skill, and hope. Across the street, a very different figure strode with purposeful confidence. Mr. Carlton Blake, a man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp, assessing eyes, moved through the marketplace like a king surveying his domain. His tailored navy blue suit was impeccable, every crease and fold reflecting a life of precision and control. Polished leather shoes clicked on the pavement, marking his path with authority. Carlton owned one of the town's most exclusive gourmet restaurants, a place of fine dining and elite clientele. His presence commanded respect and sometimes fear. His gaze swept the market with a practiced air of dismissal, barely registering the vibrant life around him. For Carlton, the market was a necessary stop, a place for quick sourcing, but never one of genuine interest. His world was one of luxury and order. Street vendors, especially those who didn't fit his expectations, rarely earned more than a passing glance. His eyes landed briefly on Deshaun's stall. For a moment, the two men locked gazes across the street. Deshaun saw a flicker of skepticism, perhaps even disdain, in Carlton's glance, a look he had grown accustomed to. But Deshaun met it not with anger, but with quiet dignity. With practiced ease, Deshaun stepped forward and offered a wooden spoon filled with a vibrant orange blend. "Good afternoon, sir," he said politely. "This is our signature blend, hand-picked, organic, ethically sourced. It adds a depth of flavor that can't be found anywhere else." Carlton looked down at the sample, then back at Deshaun with a thin, dismissive smile. "I think I'll pass," he said with an air of finality. "I don't trust sidewalk products. I prefer established suppliers." The words hit like a cold wind through the warm afternoon air. Deshaun's eyes flickered, briefly with hurt, but he recovered quickly, steady and composed. "I understand, sir. Just trying to share something special." Carlton turned sharply, his expensive shoes clicking as he walked away, leaving Deshaun standing amid the scents and colors of the market. The moment hung between them, a subtle clash of worlds, of pride and prejudice, opportunity and missed connection. As Carlton disappeared into the crowd, Deshaun took a slow, steady breath and turned back to his customers. The afternoon light continued to bathe the marketplace, indifferent to the tensions unfolding beneath it, shining on both the rejection and the quiet hope that still burned in one young man's heart. The afternoon sun continued to bathe the marketplace in its warm glow, but beneath the golden light, a subtle tension began to unfold. Carlton Blake, ever the man of purpose and precision, moved toward Deshawn's stall with an air of detached curiosity. His polished shoes clicked confidently against the pavement as he approached, his sharp eyes scanning the array of colorful jars lined up neatly on the wooden table. Deshawn noticed him immediately, the unmistakable presence of a man accustomed to privilege and control. Yet he remained composed, steady in the face of what he sensed was an impending judgment. With a practiced smile, Deshawn stepped forward, picking up a small wooden spoon he had prepared earlier. Carefully, he dipped it into one of the glass jars filled with a vibrant orange spice blend, lifting it toward Carlton with a respectful nod. "Good afternoon, sir," Deshawn began, his voice calm but sincere. "This is our signature blend hand-ground, ethically sourced from small family farms in the South. We take pride in every step, from harvest to jar. It's perfect for adding depth and warmth to dishes, with no artificial ingredients." Carlton's eyes flickered briefly over the jar and the spoonful of spice. He sniffed the scent, a complex aroma of warmth and earthiness. Yet his expression remained unchanged, the faintest edge of boredom shadowing his features. His lips curled into a slight sneer. "I'll pass," he said, voice cool and dismissive. "I don't trust sidewalk products." The words hung in the air like a cold draft. Deshawn felt a pang of disappointment, but did not let it show. Instead, he offered a small, understanding smile and replied evenly, "No worries, sir. Just trying to share something special." Carlton's gaze hardened for a moment. Then he turned on his heel and strode away, the faintest trace of smug satisfaction in his posture. The crowd around the market continued its rhythm, largely unaware of the quiet but profound exchange that had just taken place. Deshawn watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling beneath his calm surface: hurt, frustration, but also a deep resolve. He knew the path he walked was not an easy one. Too often, people like Carlton saw his work not for the skill and care it embodied, but for the color of his skin and the place he stood. Yet he would not be deterred. Instead, Deshawn turned back to his customers with renewed purpose. Each jar on his table was a testament to perseverance, to the power of passion and integrity in the face of prejudice. The sun continued to shine, casting long, warm shadows over the marketplace, reminding everyone, even the skeptical, that sometimes true value lies beneath the surface. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet relentlessness, each day slipping into the next like the steady drip of a slow leak. The marketplace continued to hum with its usual life, the chatter of vendors, the rustle of paper bags, the soft clinking of glass jars. But for Carlton Blake, the world had narrowed into a mounting problem he could neither escape nor ignore. It began with a phone call. Carlton sat in his sleek office overlooking the city, the afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting sharp, angular shadows across his polished desk. His fingers drummed anxiously on the mahogany surface as the voice on the other end relayed troubling news. "We're out of stock on the signature spice blend, Mr. Blake," said the supplier's voice, steady but regretful. "The shipment was delayed, and the next batch won't arrive for at least 2 weeks." Carlton's jaw tightened. That spice blend wasn't just another ingredient. It was the soul of his restaurant's most celebrated dish, the one that had drawn glowing reviews and repeat customers since the opening night. Without it, the dish lost its magic, and the restaurant's reputation would take a hit. His head chef, a seasoned man with silver-streaked hair and a sharp gaze, leaned over the counter later that day, concern etched deeply into his lined face. "Carlton, we can't keep that dish on the menu without the blend. Customers have already started asking why it's missing. If we don't get that flavor back soon, it could hurt us badly." Carlton nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a tightening vice. He paced the sleek kitchen, his polished shoes echoing softly against the tiled floor, the hum of kitchen appliances and chatter of staff doing little to soothe his growing anxiety. Desperation drove him to pick up the phone again and again. He called every supplier he knew, every distributor who promised quality and reliability. But the answers were the same. Out of stock. Price doubled. Cannot guarantee delivery this month. The tone was polite but firm. The obstacles insurmountable. Each refusal was like a stab beneath his carefully maintained facade. Pride and control had been his constant companions, but now they faltered, cracking under the pressure of scarcity and the looming threat of failure. Back at the restaurant, the tension was palpable. Waitstaff murmured quietly about the missing dish. Customers glanced at menus with puzzled expressions, and subtle complaints began to ripple through the dining room. The once vibrant buzz of satisfied diners dimmed into a cautious hush. Carlton found himself retreating more and more into his office, poring over inventory lists and supplier contracts, seeking any loophole, any alternative. His eyes grew tired from the relentless search, dark circles deepening beneath them. The restaurant's polished image was at stake, and he knew the clock was ticking. Despite the mounting pressure, one thought lingered stubbornly in the back of his mind, the young vendor from the market, the one he had dismissed so casually just weeks ago, Deshaun Miller, a man who had offered him something rare and genuine, something that might just fill the growing void in his kitchen. But pride, that stubborn and silent adversary, held him back. The memory of that brief exchange, the sneer, the dismissal gnawed at him, a reminder of his own prejudice. Could he swallow that pride and admit he was wrong? Could he reach out now, before the damage became irreversible? The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Carlton's reflection in the mirror showed a man worn thin by stress and regret. The golden afternoon light that once bathed the marketplace now seemed a distant memory, replaced by the cold glare of fluorescent bulbs and the sterile hum of an anxious restaurant as customers continued to voice their disappointment. The reality sank in with crushing clarity. He had to find that spice blend, no matter the cost. The question was, would he find it in time? And would he find the humility to seek it where he had once refused to look? The story was far from over, but one thing had become painfully clear. Success without respect was a brittle thing, and sometimes the price of prejudice was far greater than anyone expected. The restaurant's kitchen buzzed with the usual controlled chaos that defined its heartbeat. Pots clanged, knives chopped swiftly, and the low murmur of cooks exchanging terse instructions filled the air. Yet beneath this rhythm lay a current of tension, threading through every corner like an unseen weight. Carlton Blake stood near the pass, his face taut with exhaustion. The last few weeks had taken their toll. His sharp features, once crisp and commanding, now carried the faint shadows of sleepless nights and gnawing worry. The pressure to maintain his restaurant's reputation had become an unrelenting tide. Amidst the clatter, a young assistant chef approached cautiously. Marcus, barely out of his 20s, but sharp-eyed and eager, wiped his hands on his apron as he stepped toward Carlton. "Mr. Blake," Marcus began, his voice steady but hesitant, "I might have some news. There's a guy in the market who sells the spice blend we need. I've seen a few of your customers buying from him." Carlton's gaze snapped up sharply, a flicker of surprise breaking through his fatigue. "What? Who?" His voice was both skeptical and tinged with hope. Marcus shrugged lightly, leaning in a bit as if to share a secret. "Name's Deshaun, I think. He's got a stall near the East End. I saw Chef Ramirez and a couple of regulars picking up jars there last week. Said it was the real deal." Carlton frowned, the skepticism settling back over his expression like, "A cloak. Deshaun? The young black vendor from the market?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, he's got good reviews from the customers. Said the spices are fresh and organic. Real artisanal stuff. I thought you might want to check it out." Carlton's mind churned. Memories flashed uncomfortably. The brief encounter weeks ago, the dismissal. How had he let pride blind him? The market had never been part of his carefully curated world. His suppliers were upscale, vetted, reliable. Street vendors? They were unpredictable, risky. Yet now, desperation tugged at his reason. The kitchen was limping. His signature dish, once a shining star, was a fading memory on the menu. Customers murmured doubts. Competitors were circling. The restaurant owner's internal battle waged fiercely. Pride whispered to hold firm. But necessity screamed louder. "Where exactly is this stall?" Carlton finally asked, voice low, threading caution with urgency. Marcus smiled slightly, sensing the shift. "Near the old oak tree, right by the corner bakery. You can't miss it sign says something like handcrafted spice blends or organic spices by Deshaun." Carlton nodded slowly, the gears in, his mind turning faster. "All right, I'll take a look, but I'm not making any promises." As Marcus retreated back into the kitchen frenzy, Carlton found himself pacing the small office overlooking the restaurant floor. The hum of activity below contrasted starkly with the storm of thoughts swirling inside him. He glanced at his reflection in the darkened window-tired eyes staring back. A man wrestling with his own prejudices and the stubborn grip of pride. How many opportunities had he lost because of it? How many chances had slipped through his fingers, blinded by assumptions? The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the city. Carlton knew that the window to save his restaurant was closing rapidly. Tomorrow's reservations were already at risk. The pressure was unbearable. Despite the gnawing doubt, he made a decision. The next morning, Carlton found himself walking toward the marketplace. The sun was still low, the air cool but filled with the promise of day. The familiar sounds of vendors setting up their stalls, the murmur of early customers, filled the streets. Approaching the East End, he saw it immediately, the modest stall. With its neat wooden table, the line of colorful spice jars gleaming in the sunlight. The sign read, "Handcrafted Spice Blends, trusted by top chefs." Deshaun stood behind the counter, calm and confident, greeting customers with a warm smile. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. Carlton hesitated. For a moment, the weight of past pride and new hope heavy in his chest. He stepped forward, drawing the attention of the vendor. "Deshaun?" Carlton's voice was measured, a blend of formality and tentative respect. Deshaun's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" Carlton took a breath, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. "I'm here to buy some of your spice blend, the one I refused before. I'm told it's the best." Deshaun's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I remember. You didn't trust sidewalk products." Carlton felt a flush of embarrassment, but kept his composure. "That was before I realized I didn't have many other options." Deshaun nodded, beginning to reach for a jar. "Prices have changed since then?" Carlton frowned but nodded again. "I understand. Let's see if it's worth it." As the vendor handed over the carefully packed jar, a subtle shift took place. It was more than a transaction. It was a moment of reckoning, a crossing of boundaries that pride and prejudice had once held firm. Back at the restaurant, Carlton placed the jar on the counter, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes humility was the price of survival and perhaps the beginning of something more. The morning sun had barely risen when Carlton Blake found himself walking the familiar cobblestone path toward the marketplace. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and freshly baked bread from nearby bakeries. Birds flitted among the rooftops, their songs weaving softly through the awakening city. Yet for Carlton, the day carried a weight unlike any other. His polished shoes clicked deliberately, echoing a steady rhythm that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside his mind. He approached the eastern end of the market, his gaze searching through the sea of stalls and vendors who bustled to prepare for the day's rush. The lively murmur of voices, the bright colors of fruits and fabrics, the aroma of spices and roasting coffee, normally vibrant and invigorating, felt different today. There was tension in the air, a subtle electric charge that made the familiar marketplace feel foreign to him. And then, there it was, Deshawn's stall. It had changed. Where once stood a modest table with neatly arranged jars and a handmade sign, now stood a larger, sturdier booth. The wood was freshly polished, gleaming under the soft morning sun. Banners hung proudly overhead, one boldly declaring, "Handcrafted spice blends, trusted by top chefs." The lettering was elegant, the kind of refined typography that bespoke professionalism and success. Carlton's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something deeper stirring within him. The crowd where before the stall had seen only a handful of curious passers-by. Now a line of customers stretched down the street. Men and women in sharp suits, elegant dresses, even chefs wearing white jackets with embroidered names, patrons who looked unmistakably like the town's culinary elite, stood patiently, chatting quietly among themselves, clutching small jars and paper bags adorned with the same distinctive logo. At the center of this newfound attention was Deshawn himself. Gone was the tentative vendor who had offered a simple sample weeks ago. Now he moved with the assuredness of a man who had claimed his place. His posture was relaxed but commanding. Every interaction he had with customers was deliberate, warm, and professional. His hands moved swiftly but carefully, filling orders, accepting payments, and exchanging pleasantries. His eyes sparkled with a quiet pride and satisfaction, the kind that comes from hard-won respect. Carlton lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching. His heart beat unevenly, a tangled mix of emotions twisting within his chest. Part of him felt admiration. He could see now that Deshawn's products were more than just spices. They were a statement. Another part churned with regret, the bitter taste of missed opportunity burning at the back of his throat. And beneath it all, a gnawing sense of humility prickling at his pride. He stepped forward tentatively, careful not to draw attention, but unable to resist the pull that the bustling stall exerted on him. Deshawn looked up and caught his gaze. Their eyes met across the crowd, an unspoken conversation passing between them, an acknowledgement of the past, and the promise of what might come next. The vendor smiled, just slightly, that same knowing smile Carlton had seen before, but now charged with a new layer of confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," Deshawn greeted, his voice calm but clear above the soft hum of the marketplace. Carlton cleared his throat, straightening his jacket. "Good morning, Deshawn. It seems you've been busy." "I have," Deshawn replied, gesturing toward the line behind him. "Business has grown. Word travels fast when quality speaks for itself." Carlton nodded slowly, eyes drifting over the faces of the customers, some nodding in approval as they left, others already tasting samples with expressions of delight. He noticed a few chefs exchanging whispers, their interest unmistakable. "I underestimated you," Carlton admitted, his voice low. Deshawn shrugged lightly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "It happens. But good things have a way of making themselves known." Carlton swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his earlier dismissal settled heavily on his shoulders. This was more than a transaction. It was a turning point. Not just in business, but in understanding. He stepped closer, finally allowing himself to be part of the line, blending into the crowd that had once ignored the very man he now sought out. The air was thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, turmeric, smoked paprika each jar, a promise of flavor and history. As he waited, Carlton studied Deshawn's hands as they moved deftly, packing a jar with care, wrapping it with twine, and handing it off to a waiting customer. There was a rhythm to the work, a harmony between craft and commerce. The moment stretched, silent yet charged. Carlton's mind raced, not just with the urgency to secure the blend that would save his restaurant's signature dish, but with the realization that he was witnessing something far greater, a story of resilience, dignity, and triumph. The marketplace buzzed on, golden light spilling over the scene. And amidst the crowd, Carlton Blake understood sometimes success was measured not only in wealth or status, but in the respect earned through perseverance and belief. When it was finally his turn, Deshawn looked him in the eye again, waiting. Carlton stepped forward, ready to bridge the gap that pride had once carved between them. This was his chance to start anew and pay the price of his past with the currency of respect. The sun was dipping lower now, casting longer shadows that stretched across the bustling marketplace, like silent witnesses to the day's unfolding story. The golden light softened the edges of the crowd, where the hum of chatter and the scent of spices mingled with the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. It was a vibrant scene, alive with life and color. But amid the flow of customers and vendors, a distinct tension simmered near Deshawn's stall. Carlton Blake lingered just beyond the bustling line, his eyes fixed on the man who had come to represent so much more than just a vendor selling spices. He watched as Deshawn moved efficiently, tending to customers with calm professionalism, his hands expertly packing jars, while his voice carried the easy authority of someone who had earned his place. But Carlton did not step forward immediately. Instead, he waited, pacing slowly behind a group of customers who had just finished their purchases. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides, betraying the uneasy mixture of anticipation and hesitation roiling beneath his composed exterior. This moment, long overdue, felt charged with years of pride and prejudice converging in a fragile balance. Minutes stretched on, the crowd slowly thinning as the evening approached. Deshawn's steady stream of customers dwindled, leaving the space around his stall quieter, more intimate. Carlton took a steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and moved forward. The sudden quiet around the stall amplified the weight of the moment. Deshawn looked up as Carlton approached, his face composed but noticeably guarded. There was a polite nod of recognition, but the warmth that once might have greeted a potential customer was absent. Instead, there was something cool, measured, a silent reminder of the distance that once existed between them. "Mr. Blake," Deshawn said, voice even but without the hint of a smile. His eyes met Carlton's, steady and unreadable. Carlton swallowed hard, feeling a flush creep up his neck. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was here, the words seemed lodged somewhere deep inside. He cleared his throat and finally spoke. "I'm here for the spice blend, the one you offered weeks ago." His voice wavered slightly, but held steady. "The signature blend your customers keep raving about." Deshawn's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, after a brief pause, he nodded slowly. "I remember," he said, his tone calm but edged with something sharper. "You didn't trust sidewalk products." The words hung between them like a low drum beat, reverberating through the space, in a way that made Carlton suddenly aware of every eye nearby. It was not a question, nor a condemnation, just a clear statement of fact. The memory of that day, so quick and dismissive, felt like a shadow stretching across the present, Carlton's mouth opened, then closed, and he shifted awkwardly on his feet. The sharp line of his jaw softened as he grappled with the mix of shame and urgency that now overwhelmed him. I was wrong, he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I realize that now. Deshaun studied him for a moment longer, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small jar. The label gleamed in the fading light. Handcrafted spice blend, organic and ethically sourced. The jar felt heavier than Carlton expected. As it was handed over, Carlton fumbled with his wallet, the crisp bills inside a stark contrast to the richness of the moment. How much? He asked, almost hesitant. Deshaun's eyes flicked up sharply, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Prices have changed, he said simply. Carlton nodded, swallowed his pride, and counted out the bills without protest. It was more than he had initially imagined, far more. But the time for hesitation had passed. This was not just a purchase. It was an investment in redemption. As the money changed hands, the weight of the transaction settled on both men. Carlton felt it deeply, the sting of his earlier prejudice, the cost of missed opportunities. Deshaun, meanwhile, carried the quiet satisfaction of having been proven right, of having turned dismissal into demand. The marketplace around them seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat. Longer before the normal rhythm resumed, customers wandered. Back, vendors shouted their greetings, and the scents of cinnamon and cumin filled the air once more. Carlton turned away, the jar carefully cradled in his hands. He walked slowly back toward the street, each step lighter than the last, but carrying the echo of a lesson learned. Behind him, Deshaun returned to his work, the brief confrontation already folding into the larger story of resilience, respect, and hard-earned success. In that quiet exchange lay a truth neither man could deny. Pride can close doors, but humility has the power to open them again, sometimes at a price far higher than money. Carlton stood there, the small glass jar now resting in the palm of his hand. The spice shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun, a vibrant blend of reds, oranges, and browns, bold, warm, alive. It looked exactly as he remembered, yet now it felt different, heavier, somehow, not just in weight, but in meaning. Across the stall, Deshaun regarded him with a quiet, unreadable expression. The crowd had dispersed, the line now gone, and only a soft murmur of background voices remained. The air between them felt charged, not tense, exactly, but potent. Like something unsaid had finally made its way to the surface. Then came the smile. It wasn't smug. It wasn't spiteful. If anything, it was faint, cool, and matter-of-fact, a smile that said everything without needing a single flourish. The kind of smile worn by someone who had been dismissed once, and had since built a kingdom from the dust left behind. Well, Deshaun said, brushing invisible flecks of spice dust off his apron, prices have changed. Carlton tilted his head slightly, the beginnings of unease creeping across his brow. Changed? Deshaun's tone didn't shift. It remained calm, clear, and unapologetic. It's $75 a jar now. The words hit Carlton like a slap of cold wind. He blinked. 75? He repeated, not quite able to hide the surprise in his voice. He stopped himself. He'd almost said triple, but he knew Deshaun knew that already. Deshaun nodded slowly. Supplies tight, demands grown. He gestured. Around him subtly, to the empty jars behind the counter, to the polished wood, the crisp new labels, the fine linen bags now accompanying each purchase. And trust doesn't come cheap. For a brief moment, Carlton felt the sharp sting of insult rising in his chest. It swelled there, the instinct to argue, to protest, to fall back on the power of his name, his restaurant, his money. How many vendors would jump at the chance to have his business? How many would beg to have their product featured in his kitchen? But none of that came out, because in the reflection of Deshawn's eyes, Carlton saw something he hadn't expected. Dignity, not bitterness, not vengeance, just the steady calm of a man who had waited. And prepared and risen, Carlton looked down at the jar again. He remembered scoffing at it just weeks ago. He remembered turning his back. And now he realized the man he had once dismissed was offering him exactly what he needed, new terms. And Carlton had none to bargain with. His pride screamed at him to walk away. But the quiet voice of reason, of reality, held firmer. This spice blend wasn't just a solution to his supply problem. It was the core of his restaurant's most celebrated dish. Customers had already noticed its absence. Critics would follow. The cost of losing the dish and the reputation tied to it would be far greater than $75. So he nodded. Slowly, no haggling, no resistance. Carlton reached into his wallet with a steady hand. The leather creaked as he pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. "Keep the change," he said, voice low but firm. Deshawn took the bill without a word, folding it neatly and slipping it into a small metal cash box. Then, with care and professionalism, he reached below the counter and pulled out a linen pouch, embroidered with his brand. He placed the jar inside, drew the ties closed, and handed it back with both hands, not as a gift, not as a favor, but as a transaction that was clear, complete, and on his terms. "Appreciate your business," Deshawn said. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no gloating. Just a man doing good work and valuing it accordingly. Carlton took the pouch and gave a single nod. He turned slowly and began to walk away, the spice cradled carefully in his hand. Each step back toward the street felt heavier than the last. As if the very weight of that jar carried more than flavor, it carried a lesson. A few steps away, he glanced back. Deshawn had already moved on to the next customer, speaking to a young woman who looked eager, curious. The smile he gave her was wider than the one he'd given Carlton, not out of malice, but familiarity. Respect earned through openness. Carlton turned again and kept walking. The sting of the $75 wasn't the real pain. The real cost was realizing what he could have had for far less, had he simply chosen to see value, not in prestige, but in people. And now the bill had come due. Paid it in full. And walked away wiser. The evening lights inside Carlton's restaurant shimmered softly, bouncing off the polished marble countertops and warm wooden beams that framed the open-concept kitchen. There was a low hum in the air, the sound of glasses clinking, laughter fluttering between tables, forks cutting gently against porcelain. For the first time in weeks, the dining room was nearly full. Carlton stood at the pass, watching the steady movement of his kitchen brigade. The energy was different tonight, focused, confident. The tension that had hung thick in the air for days had dissipated, replaced by something steadier, like the heartbeat of a body returning to health. In front of him sat a small ramekin, filled with a velvety sauce the color of ember. It clung perfectly to the spoon as he lifted it, steam curling upward in fragrant ribbons. He brought it to his lips, eyes narrowing as he focused. The flavor bloomed instantly rich, deep, smoky, and sweet with just the right amount of fire. A complexity layered like a symphony. Warm cinnamon at the back, toasted cumin up front, a whisper of something citrusy in the middle that lingered long after the bite. It was perfect. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in, a memory of the original dish sparking alive again in his mind. This was what they had been missing. Not just an ingredient, a signature, a soul. The spice blend worked even better than he remembered. Somehow, the depth of it had matured since the last time he tried it. Or maybe he had. "Chef." His shoes called from across the line. Tables 12 and 9 just reordered the special, said it's the best it's ever tasted. Carlton gave a small nod, his gaze falling to the linen pouch resting just behind the cutting board. The jar from Deshawn sat inside it, opened but still nearly full, though he'd already made a mental note to reorder soon. Throughout the night, the compliments rolled in like gentle waves against a once shuttered shore. Reviews started reappearing. Online quick, glowing notes about how the signature dish had returned, and somehow tasted even better. Regulars posted pictures, tagging the restaurant with captions like, "Finally back," and the dish that made them famous reborn. Carlton moved through the restaurant with quiet professionalism, offering his usual nods and brief exchanges. He smiled where he needed to, thanked guests for coming, but even as the glow of a successful night lit up the room, something inside him remained unsettled, not in a painful way, but like a subtle ache, dull, persistent, and personal. Later, long after the last dessert had been plated and the clinking of forks gave way to the hush of closing, Carlton sat alone in his office. The lights were low, and the white noise of the empty restaurant surrounded him like a whisper. He swirled a small glass of brandy in his hand, but his eyes weren't on the drink. They were on the jar now placed beside him on the desk dock. It was beautiful. He had to admit simple, but elegant. The branding was sharp, the label tasteful. It could have easily sat on the shelves of an upscale boutique or high-end food emporium. He turned it slowly in his hand, reading the small line at the bottom of the label, "Crafted with pride, rooted in tradition." Carlton let out a slow breath. Not a sigh, not quite. Just an exhale weighted with something he didn't yet know how to name. The spice had saved his dish, saved the reputation of the restaurant. It had brought customers back through his doors. In another context, this moment would have felt like a victory, but instead it felt unfinished. He wasn't dwelling on the money. The $75 per jar had barely left a dent in his margins. No, what haunted him wasn't what he had paid. It was what he hadn't built. Because now, even as the restaurant thrived again, Carlton knew he wasn't Deshawn's partner. He wasn't part of the story that had helped this young man rise. He had no part in the trust that others now clearly had in Deshawn's craft. He had paid for the product, but not for the relationship. That door had closed the moment he chose doubt over curiosity, pride over respect. He could still buy the spice, maybe even strike up a deal if Deshawn allowed it. But the chance to build something together, from the beginning something based on shared vision, mutual respect, human connection, that was gone. And no amount of gourmet acclaim could bring it back. Carlton took another sip of brandy, the burn warming his chest. He stared down at the label one more time before gently returning the jar to its pouch. There was no bitterness in his heart, just a quiet, sobering realization. In his world, deals were made over signatures, brands, contracts, but some deals, some of the most valuable ones, were forged in respect, humility, and belief. And those you couldn't pay for. Not when you showed up late. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark sky, and inside, Carlton remained still tasting both the richness of success and the subtle, lingering flavor of what might have been. Weeks passed. The restaurant continued to thrive, and from the outside, Carlton Blake looked every bit the successful restaurateur he had always been. The reservations returned. The 5-star reviews rolled back in. Guests clinked wine glasses over polished tables, praising the return of the signature dish that had once been a crown jewel of the menu. Even food critics who had started to look elsewhere now whispered that Carlton had found a new edge, a deeper flavor in his work. But behind the calm veneer of the restaurant, behind the tailored suits and the quiet elegance of white tablecloths, Carlton carried a weight he hadn't quite put down. Every time he passed the jar of spice in the prep kitchen, a small part of him stung Dot, not because of the price tag. No money had never been the issue, Dot. It was the knowledge that he had been wrong. And, worse, that he had been small. He remembered how easily the judgment had come. The casual wave of the hand, the look he'd given Deshawn, the assumption embedded in a single sentence, "I don't trust sidewalk products." What he hadn't said, but had meant was, "I don't trust you." That truth lived with him. Now, no matter how many customers walked through his doors, no matter how many glowing reviews came in, he had built his reputation on excellence, precision, and taste. But the moment he had encountered something unfamiliar, something outside his curated world, he had recoiled not from the product, but from the man behind it. Prejudice wasn't always loud. It wasn't always a slur or a slam. Sometimes it was quieter, cleaner, dressed in business language and cool smiles. It was the unseen wall between us and them. The assumption that skill and legitimacy must come with a pedigree, or a suit or a certain skin tone. Carlton had prided himself on being discerning. But what he'd failed to be was curious. That first moment in the market could have gone so differently. He could have tasted the blend, asked a question, given Deshawn even the smallest opening. But he hadn't. And in doing so, he hadn't just shut a door, he'd locked it from the inside. And that, he knew now, had cost him something much greater than money. Because the truth was, Deshawn didn't need him. That jar on the shelf, the one that now flavored the restaurant's most iconic dish, was being used in 3 other establishments across the city. Carlton had discovered it only later, over coffee with a fellow chef, who spoke of this brilliant young guy in the market whose blends are better than anything you'll find in a catalog. He even does private blends now, the chef had added. But it's invite only, real selective. Carlton had nodded politely, but inside, he felt it like a quiet closing of another door. Deshawn had not just succeeded. He had risen, on his own terms, with integrity, with patience, and Carlton had become just another client. No collaboration, no relationship, just a transaction at market price. He didn't resent Deshawn for that. In fact, he respected him more than he had most people in his own circle. The young man had held his ground, and rightly so. He hadn't begged to be seen. He had waited to be recognized. And when the world finally came knocking, he answered with the calm dignity of someone who had always known his worth. Carlton, for all his accolades and awards, had learned one of the hardest lessons of his career. That in business, as in life, respect is currency, and without it, you pay a premium. The world had changed. Diners no longer cared just about French training or imported truffle foam. They wanted story, substance, connection. They wanted to know the hands that grew their food, the names behind the flavors. Deshawn had known that instinctively. Carlton had only learned it the hard way. And so, as the restaurant thrived and the night hours passed, he found himself more introspective. He spent more time on the floor, more time speaking with his staff, asking where ingredients came from, who they were working with. He started visiting the market more often quietly, without the suit, without the swagger. Sometimes he'd see Deshawn at a distance, surrounded by customers and chefs, smiling easily as he shared samples and stories. Carlton never interrupted. He simply watched and listened. He was learning now, late but earnestly, because some mistakes don't get undone. Some doors, once closed, remain that way. But what could be done, what must be done, was to walk forward with eyes open. To never again underestimate someone because of where they stood, or what they wore, or the shade of their skin. Prejudice, Carlton had discovered, doesn't just hurt others. It costs you the richness of what you might have shared, built, learned. He had lost a partnership, but maybe, just maybe, he had gained a deeper understanding of what success really meant, and that was worth holding on to, even if it came at $75 a jar.